Welcome to Talk to Brazil with Tom Rioch, the business connector to business in Brazil. Welcome to Talk to Brazil, the business connection, leading business podcast about business in the world. I'm Tom Rioch, an American from Pittsburgh, known as the king of networking, and talking from my podcast studio in Campinas, São Paulo, Brazil. Today's guest is Priscilla Nyahwa-Shumba, and she's joining us from Perth, Australia. She is founder at reevent.co, helping early entrepreneurs in Australia and the world to win at business through connecting professionals with startups and small businesses. She is producer and podcast host at Reinventing Perspectives. That's where we first met, and I was actually a guest on her show. Priscilla is author and consultant, and she studied at the University of Massachusetts in Boston in the United States and the Midland State University in Zimbabwe. So with that, Priscilla, welcome to Talk to Brazil, the Business Connection.
Thank you so much for that, Tom. Thank you for a great intro. I'm honored to be with you, and hello to your audience.
Well, and one of the things I mentioned before we talk, you're one of the few people that I know in Perth, Australia. I do know many people on the East Coast, so it's always a pleasure to speak to persons from the other side, I guess. Priscilla, for our audience, you are a multicultural person, and you deal with entrepreneurs in many parts of the world. What do you see as similarities or differences in Africa, the United States, and Australia?
Oh, that's a great question, Tom. I think I'll start with the similarities. There's definitely an increased passion for entrepreneurship globally at this point in time, I think. I think with the pandemic, it's just accelerated. Well, whether forced entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship by choice, but definitely there's an increase in entrepreneurs. And I think what I've really seen is that in the West, entrepreneurship is really looked at as a cool thing. It's becoming a cool thing, with the entrepreneur who's on their laptop at the beach or by a pool and making $1 million online. So I think that image has really drawn especially young people in to want to be entrepreneurs at this point in time. Whereas what I saw a little bit in Africa, the situation is just a little bit different. It's more of really forced entrepreneurship, really, rather than entrepreneurship being a cool thing, due to unemployment and lack of access to opportunities. So people would love to be working in a job, that they are forced into entrepreneurship that way. But all the same, there's a great passion for being enterprising.
Mm-hmm. I think with that, I would compare that to Brazil. What you just said is the same thing here. Many Brazilians, and here too, we have high unemployment. You have many people that really don't have the educational background or opportunities or the skill set for business. And really, they look at entrepreneurship as for survival. What they hope to gain from any small business they can start is basically a monthly stipend to survive. So is that
Yes.
do you see the same? And generally, they're local. They want to have a local business in their neighborhood, their street, or whatever. And that's maybe the limit.
Yes, I definitely think it's the same with the situation in Africa, Tom. It's more like you're an entrepreneur, but your hope is really to get a job at some point in time. And your entrepreneurship is really just to keep you surviving until you get that big job, that nice job that you believe that, especially a lot of graduates, who've gone through schooling and there is no industry to absorb them.
Well, what you share on your sites and what you do to help entrepreneurs, basic skill sets serve in any circumstance, right?
Yes. I think, being an African and understanding that background, and also having had the opportunity to live in the United States and in Australia, I do see that, there's this interesting thing that's happening where it's like in Africa, it's forced entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. And in America, it's you have a job. But now people are realizing, oh, well, I don't really want the job. I don't want to just be, a cog in the machine. I don't just want to be a number in a huge corporate. I want to do my own thing and to control my own destiny. Mm-hmm. So it's quite interesting, these two dynamics that are happening. That it's like you want a job, but probably if you got the job, you'd realize that you actually don't want the job.
Yeah, nobody wants, well, there, I agree with you. Nobody wants the 9 to 5 there, right?
Yes.
And it's what you said. They want to be on the beach, don't have their laptop or drive around their car, or having somebody, an autonomous car they don't have to drive anymore, and make $1 million every 15 minutes. So that's a reality. But the rest of the world, and most of the world, not only Africa, Brazil, when we're talking about the rest of the world, it's different. Completely different, and it's really the day-to-day. As you mentioned at the beginning, you lead with small businesses, you lead with startups, and startups in Africa, Brazil, and I'm guessing in Perth are a little bit different than maybe a startup in Boston.
Yes, for sure. I think one other important difference that I often laugh with a lot of my friends that, when you're starting a business, maybe in the United States, it's like there's a lot of this focus on you should niche down and niche down some more. You know the talk, Tom,
Mm-hmm.
that there's so much out there that in
Right.
order for you to be seen, there's
Mm-hmm.
just every market is just sort of flooded, and you have to do the most. You have to really narrow it down to the smallest tiny thing in order for you to really excel in that area and be seen.
Right.
Whereas then you find that in Africa, there's really an open space.
But I agree with you, and I think we mentioned this in the podcast, my interview with you. In any sense, we need to be seen. We do have to work on branding. We have to show up or be found, and that can be local. Even in the neighborhood here where I live, if people know what I do, they can knock on my door and find me, but they have to know that.
Yes, absolutely. And, the potential for really growth in business and entrepreneurship is so huge in places where there isn't that congestion that exists in Western countries, and places where there are not 100 companies doing what you're doing,
Right.
you know. So the opportunities there, but also the access to things like funding and infrastructures. You realize that in America, as much as there's so much opportunity and infrastructure, they still realize that entrepreneurs still need that grooming. That's why there are accelerators and all
Mm-hmm.
these places where entrepreneurs go. It's, people often say, oh, you just start now, start simple. Yes, that's great. But to create something that survives beyond just your everyday needs, you do need, those tools to help you to build a big business or even a small business.
Right.
But that lasts a long time.
Well, all big businesses started small.
Yes,
No
yeah.
business starts big. I don't know any that just started out big. So, but for our listeners, tell us something about Perth. How is Perth for entrepreneurship, for startups, for business?
I think it's very different from, Sydney, in that it's a very small city with a very small population. But it also, because of that, uh, the energy and the opportunity to really connect with other entrepreneurs, and that energy for entrepreneurship in the area is really taking off too. So it's a great place to be. I think the lovely thing about small places is that you almost are not just one person in a sea. I don't know if you get the sense
Mm-hmm.
that I'm trying to make. It's easy to connect with this person who connects with another person who connects, and then you have a network, and it's a good, strong network.
Mm-hmm. Well, how small is Perth? You're saying it's small, but what is the size of Perth?
Oh, I don't know the numbers exactly. The reason I say it's small is that it's one of the states where between the biggest city and the smallest city, the difference is huge.
Mm-hmm.
So Perth is the biggest city here in Western Australia, and the next city in terms of size is Kalgoorlie.
Mm-hmm.
And Kalgoorlie is probably a city with one street or two streets of shops, and that's about it.
Hmm.
And that's the second largest city in the state. Most of the state is areas of mining,
Mm-hmm.
so it's really a resource heavy
Right.
um, state.
That too, I can share that vision to many places here in Brazil. Obviously, we have large cities where there's a concentration, but Brazil is continental as well. We have small local enterprises in cities, 20, 30, 40,000 people. And as you said, maybe one or two streets, but a lot happening. And back to what you said at the beginning, if we're digitally connected, if we have internet access, we can be in business. It really doesn't depend on the size of the city. It depends on the size and the availability of and connectivity.
Absolutely, Tom. I mean, what the internet has done for, entrepreneurs, for people globally, is that access. Mm-hmm. You can be a, affiliate marketer anywhere if you have internet access.
Right.
And the threshold for really beginning to make things happen is just your time. If you have time, that's the most valuable thing, to learn how to use social media,
right,
to learn how to network on these platforms, to learn how to use these platforms to sell. And all this information most of it is free.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of taking the time to research that.
Well, what you said, we all have time. We all have the same amount of time. It's all 24 hours, 7 days in a week, right? So that's something we share globally. The sun rises and sets in Africa, in Boston, in Perth, here in Campinas, and every day's a new day. And we all have that. Now, how we prioritize our time could be different. What do we think we need? What I found in startups and many entrepreneurs, they're still looking closely for a technical education. They want to learn stuff. When they need to learn how to communicate, they need to learn to find people, to find opportunities, to use internet, right? So it's really how you adapt that and how you adapt your 24 hours. We've decided today to share 30 minutes, right? You're in Perth, I'm in Campinas. What we say and how we say it will be shared with thousands of people. And we don't even know where they are when they're listening.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the beauty of the time we're living in.
Now, did that help you when you decided, and that's the question, what made you decide to start a podcast?
I think I actually more of just stumbled into it. I felt I had something to say, and I thought, well, why not say it? I didn't have so much a plan. The plan the more I did it, the more I realized how to do it better.
Right.
And the more I realized okay, well, probably I need a plan now.
Well, that's a typical startup, right?
Absolutely.
The important thing, and that's what I suggest to people, is to start, just to, get up out of the chair or do something. And what you have found, what I have found, my startup in a podcast was basically the same, just doing it and learning how to do it as you go. And many times even in a business, if you want to sell hot dogs on the corner, you have to start. And then you learn what makes it better. So what you did is what I would say most people need. And I'm going to use the word courage. It's not really courage, but it's a personal challenge, is to overcome the barrier of sitting still.
Yes, that's what it is, Tom. The more you sit and think about something, the less likely you are to act. You'll actually paralyze yourself sometimes with thinking. And you don't need to know everything. You can't possibly know everything.
Right.
And whatever you think is going to work, unfortunately, it probably isn't, but you need to test it,
right,
so that you know what will work.
Well, I learned that. It's one thing that even Warren Buffett says. He says, and I agree, we don't know everything. But what we should do is surround ourselves with people who do know. And I think what you did and the way I did it, just find somebody who knows. And the world's full of people who knows more than we do.
Yes, and it's amazing how many people would be willing to help you once you get started. It's one thing to ask someone to help you with a concept, and it's another thing to ask someone because you're in the trenches of doing something and you'd really like an answer. The energy is different, and you'll be surprised how many people will be open to helping you.
Well, the success of your podcast really comes from what you said. You're offering, on the first side, you're offering information to people, right? To your listeners. They're gaining from that, from the people that you interviewed. Myself, you interviewed me. And hopefully your listeners learned something. But I mentioned before we got on the air, I learned from listening to myself on the podcast that you made. So we need to sit back and have that self-evaluation.
Yes, yes, yes. You're so right, Tom. And I'm happy that people are listening and learning. And it's not because I know more. It's because as I talk to guests, I also learn so much. And I want to bring the audience along. As I learn, I want them to learn too. As I grow, I would like them to grow too. So, and I get to meet amazing people like yourself who are open to sharing things. So it's an amazing journey, and I'm totally enjoying it.
Well, that's mutual. I mean, the amazing people, you're one of them. And I think the most amazing thing is what you are doing, and where you're trying, and the reach. I think that's one of the things that maybe when I started, and I learned that from other people, so we shouldn't be worried about what our reach is or what the size of our audience is. People who know more than me said, if you have an audience of one, you have an audience. And that one will start, it'll become two, will become three. And we don't really need to worry about the numbers. Many places, and back to the States, as you mentioned, the States all about numbers. If you talk about having a podcast in the States, it's always how many listeners do you have, and what's the number. In other places, not so much. It's having access, as you have, access to people all over the world, and access that you have that other people in the States don't have.
Yes, yeah, that's so correct, Tom. And I think when I started, I had no idea of numbers, but the more you get into sort of the culture that's in the United States, it is very numbers focused. Mm-hmm. And someone told me and said, they heard this somewhere, that if you have 20 people sitting and listening to you, would you say that that's a small number of people? If you were in the same room and you were speaking in front of 20 people, that's a lot of people.
Right. And I think that's part of our equation. And for an interpreter, anyone starting up, and my suggestion to them is that forget the numbers, just do it.
Yes. Just get out there and do it and add value to people, and you will receive value along the way.
Now, your site, I see you offer a number of things, and you do offer free resources to interpreters, right? Yes. What are some of the things that they can have and see on your site?
Okay. If you go on my site, www.reinventingperspectives.com, I put up stuff on branding. I look at it from our guests. I often ask them, what has been the most impactful book that you've read? Mm-hmm. And I go into those books and create something that entrepreneurs can have quick access to with actionable steps. I've got something on branding by one of, the most renowned marketing experts there, Donald Miller. I have something from the E-Myth Revisited to help entrepreneurs understand how really to not work in their business, but work on their business. I have something there about customer service, about how you can improve your profits by just improving your customer service. So just a lot of actionable things that entrepreneurs can quickly look at and put to work.
And those are pretty generic offerings that work anywhere in the world.
Absolutely.
Now, the feedback that you get then from your listeners, what are their suggestions on being helped?
People often say, they'll send me an email and say, can you just take a look at my website and tell me what you think? Or just, how can I do this better? And usually I send them to the resources, and I do just say to them, whatever you're doing, if you can just get a little bit better at doing it every single day,
right,
you're on your way.
Right.
Because there is no magic. There's no magic potion. There's no secret key. Mm-hmm. But doing what you do and having the commitment to do it better.
Well, I think that's the greatest suggestion, is to do something every day. Because what we see in the world, and that's everywhere, what I see, the world changes every day. So if we are, from when I started my podcast, and I'm sure when you started yours, even podcasting has changed. It's not only the technical part, the lengths of programs, different. Where we met on podmatch.com, I see a number of platforms that were created to share and to help even podcast hosts get together, podcast guests. So these are pretty recent things. So, and if you're not aware of every day, and sometimes you can miss out, so you really need to paddle your boat every day.
Oh, yes. Paddle every day, keep your head down, but also occasionally look up to see what's going on so that you're not left in yesterday.
No, that's the point. If we think together, what is the probability of us meeting it's close to zero, correct?
Yes.
But the fact that we shared interest on a platform, and that platform helped us find each other, I think that's important, because much of what is needed, and that's back to your branding. If you have a business, if you want to start something, that energy of somebody helping you or a platform helping you is essential.
Yes. It absolutely is. As one mind can only do so much. Mm-hmm. So never operate as one mind, because it's not enough. You get as many minds as you can together and help other minds too, and it'll grow. You'll all grow. Everyone wins.
Now, and what you do, you share with entrepreneurs for businesses and startups. And so you find people, and people who have succeeded, and then reshare that with others starting up?
Yes.
So
I find people who are experts in different things. Mm-hmm. And I make sure that I ask them the kind of things that an entrepreneur or someone who's starting out would really love to know. What can I do, and what can I do, and how can I do this thing?
And every day you see that. You have experts every day, and you have new people wanting to start every day. Mm-hmm. So it's an ongoing and continual process.
Absolutely, it is. There's just so much information out there, and listening to podcasts is a great way of getting a lot of information in a short amount of time. Mm-hmm. As you go about your day.
No, and what I found that's true. People like to listen. They like to hear. And as you said, most younger persons are multifunctional. They like to do 3 or 4 things at the same time and have the capacity to do that. I unfortunately don't, but many of them do. So the multitasking, and for business today, a startup it's multitasking, because normally startups may be a 1 or 2 man show, right? With few people. Yeah. So you do have to, row the boat, look up, look down, look everywhere, find opportunities, right? Keep yourself dry. And that's a little bit of everything.
Yeah, we call the chief everything officer days.
Let me ask you one more question, because this too, I've seen that out in the world. I shared on LinkedIn today an article that I had seen. Obviously, you're a woman who has lived and studied in Africa, a woman who's lived and studied in the States. You live in Perth. When we're talking about entrepreneurs, male and female, is it the same or is it different? Is it easy? Is it more difficult?
It's interesting. I find that with men, it's almost like that bravado of being in business is celebrated. Mm-hmm. And it's not so much celebrated if it was the exact same bravado, but done by a female. You find people tend to not like when women talk about money.
Right.
And they tend to really be drawn to and attracted to when men kind of show off and talk about huge sums of money that way. Mm-hmm. So definitely it's sort of your approach and understanding how people receive things is definitely a little bit different.
And so to that, that would be a similarity, Africa, the United States, and Australia, right?
Yes.
From a standpoint for women, I agree with you. And same thing here in Brazil. And there are many women who have to start up, again, because they need to survive. And unfortunately in Brazil, many men do not look kindly on the fact that their spouse or wants to be in business, wants to do anything. And that's a challenge. And sometimes that becomes a domestic problem. The spouse doesn't want you to do anything. And that's a problem.
Absolutely. The challenges that arise with gender differences, we've still got a long way to go. But we do see glimmers of hope all over of women, reaching executive levels, women board members. We don't see enough, but we are beginning to see that as not so much as one anymore, but more and more.
No, and I think what you're doing and how you're doing it, you're helping other women throughout the world, and you have become a model to that. And even I can relate that to Brazil. What many people in Brazil need are models. Models in the sense of business success, of personal success, of doing what you're doing and how you're doing it. And it's not easy.
Oh, absolutely.
There are challenges. We say, well, it's easy. It's easier in Australia, or it's easier in Campinas, and it's easier for Tom. It's easier for Priscilla. But it's not easy for anyone. And it all becomes work. You need to work at it.
Absolutely. It's a lot of hard work. I like to say there's nothing much that's glamorous about entrepreneurship. But it's great to be able to think about something, act on it, and see whatever it is that you've created adding value to other people. That's what's great about entrepreneurship.
Well, that part is glamorous. I think part of that glamour,
Yes.
we have to internalize that. I do that because sometimes, and obviously you get to the point and say, why am I doing what I'm doing? But if we don't bring that to our own self, with that feeling that, my success hopefully can be somebody else's success. And if they succeed, I'm succeeding, as you are. So that is that's the coal in our fire. That keeps us burning and going.
Yes, for sure. Yes.
Very good. Well, Priscilla, I want to thank you for sharing your time, sharing your information, congratulate you on what you're doing. And again, help our audience repeat where they can find you.
Okay, thank you so much, Tom. To the audience, please go to www.reinventingperspectives.com, or you can find me on Instagram at Reinventing Perspectives Podcast, or under my name, Priscilla Nyahwa-Shumba on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect.
Very good. And for our audience on LinkedIn, Priscilla, it's PriscillaNyahwa, and the last name is Shumba. Priscilla Shumba on LinkedIn, reinventingperspectives.com, where you'll find much free information for entrepreneurship. So Priscilla, thanks again and success.
Thank you, Tom.
I'd like to thank our audience and our sponsor, Focus MI Market Intelligence. Focus MI specializes in market research for the Brazilian agricultural market. More about them on their website, www.focusmi.com. Talk to Brazil podcast can be found on all major podcast platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcast, TuneIn, Amazon, Geo7, YouTube, and many others. Remember, when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Goodbye, and thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Tom Rioch on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.